At one time or another, we've all been asked the common question, what's one thing you wish you could tell a younger version of yourself? While Marty McFly is the only person I know that's successfully gone back to the future, my conversation with Blodin Ukella, founder and CEO of the RYL Company, provided me a closely similar opportunity. And that's because a decade earlier, I was that same ambitious CPG industry young buck, leaving a strategy leadership position at a hypergrowth active nutrition brand to relentlessly pave my own way. But all joking aside, Blodin and I start off by talking through his time at the plant based protein brand OWYN, where he describes a few key lessons that impacted the strategic approach at his current venture. Moreover, Blodin and I examine several elements of the RYL Company strategic foundation, including its go to market approach, having an additive mindset, and financial efficiency prioritization. We also walk through the evolution of the functional tea category before shifting our focus over to dissecting the implications surrounding the Morgan Wallen effect. Finally, we break down the RYL acronym and look into the future of the Beverage platform. But these are just some of the interesting topics we chatted about in this episode. So, without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with Blodin Ukella. So I'm glad we got to make this happen. You paid the product tax, which I appreciate that. Yeah, you don't have to send things normally to me, but when you cancel on me last minute, I hit you with the product tax, and you paid. So
it's all good.
We're
man.
here, so people get to actually listen to the content. So I'm excited about that.
Yep.
But Blodin, I appreciate just you taking the time out of your day today and us being able to kind of chat.
Absolutely, man. Look, it's my favorite tax to pay.
Yeah.
When I get if the only tax I pay is sending product to somebody, I'm dynamite, man. That's a good move.
Yeah, let's see if we could probably get that with like the political cycle. Like, let's just get all the other taxes out of there, and then it's just you guys paying product tax. You guys just
That's
send
it.
off, and then it's liquid on lips. We get to try it, and then we'll arguably probably buy more. That it'll all make sense in the long run, anyways.
I hope so. That'll be the move.
So before we talk about the RYL Company, I want to kind of talk about OWYN, because that's something that's in my wheelhouse that I've talked about a lot. One
Yep.
that I took the victory lap on because I called Simply Good Foods acquiring the company years before it happened, and I just think that there's, at least from what I know deeply about that business and what I know about the RYL Company, there is for sure some influences, and there's some common threads that I think, being that you were running strategy there, that it just makes sense that you take a lot of really great things from and you kind of bring it forward. But I wanted to get a little bit of your sense of just one, the experience you had within that really impressive brand. And then secondly, like kind of key lessons or things that you kind of picked up and brought into the RYL Company.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, first and foremost, huge kudos to the OWYN team for taking it to the promised land, as I call it, right?
Yeah.
With the exit. But I'll tell you that the number one thing I think does come back to team. OWYN's team is one of the best teams in the industry, right? It always really has been. They're led by great leadership with Mark and Matt and Brad Moose and Nev, and the C-suite is just best in class. They work extremely well from a collaborative standpoint. Everything that I think most people think I took from OWYN is things that you wouldn't see taking from OWYN, right, from a strategic standpoint. And that really is all the stuff that happens behind the scenes. And I learned so many amazing things from each one of those respective leaders, whether it was on the financial side, operational side, sales side, just pure leadership side. And I truly do believe that that's one of the two most critical pillars when you're building any of these things, if you do want to get to the exit point. But I think the second largest thing that we learned at OWYN, and we always had as a core discipline, was strategy, right? And a hyper-focused fixation on what winning was, right? Like there was always a earmark of where we needed to go, how we were going to get there. There was not a sense of urgency in getting there. There was the urgency within us because we wanted to make it there. But there was no urgency in the sense of failure, right? Like you didn't want to fail to get somewhere. You wanted to meticulously have a sense of patience, understanding exactly where you needed to go when and how you wanted to get there in what time frame. And OWYN was really a great example of that, in my opinion, because those guys were so diabolical in the sense of they understood that single serve was a great impulse purchase occasion to drive initial consumer trial in the right markets through natural and a couple select regional independent players, and never really went all in on everything else that every beverage brand does, right? Which is I want to be everywhere. I want to be everything to everyone immediately. It was just never a part of the DNA at the end of the day. What was in the DNA of that business, which we heavily use at RYL, is who do we want to be relevant to? How are we going to be relevant to them? And when and where is that relevancy going to connect, right? And OWYN was a very, very good example of that because they always knew, I want to be this to this consumer. I know that they're looking for it here. I know that where they're looking for it, it's going to be in this pack format, right? Like so many unique and tactical approaches were taken throughout the entire lifespan of the brand. And that's what we're doing too, right? Is who's our customer? What do we want to mean to them? How do we want to mean it to them? And what's the ultimate goal in the end game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those were things, like you said, I mean, not maybe that would be the first thing that people would jump out and talk about or wherever. I think that maybe they would, look at the ways in which, you are appealing to maybe today's and tomorrow's consumers, and you're over indexing on like younger consumer. Like, there's those things that are outward that I think if it's through targeting or whatever that seem kind of similar. And then also, I think there's some elements of transparency or kind of doing the hard stuff and leaning into that OWYN, I think really did well. And that you have kind of taken as a pillar within, RYL and kind of looking at that and just, I trying the product. I think one of the things that really spoke to me and was pretty similar to what happened when I first tried OWYN is that I think there was parity to like the conventional taste buds. Like when you are looking at, the category as a whole, and if it's tea for you guys or if it's protein or whatever it is, there is subjectivity to taste, and that's just the case. But I think there's objectively great across the entire category, not great for natural or great for this. Like you have to be objectively great and be parity at that level, because then the subjectivity variance, I think still you're within a range that makes sense. And when I tried the product, I said, I get exactly like the time and probably the intensity that you took to make that product taste as close to that kind of indulgent like category that people would think about.
Yep.
And I think that stuff doesn't go unnoticed. Like I think that's where you can both have, the idea of people switching from conventional, but like even just people that have left the category and have a nostalgic thought in their mind, like I haven't had tea or lemonade in the sense of like the full sugar for probably a decade or so.
Oh, without a doubt.
But yet you still remember when you were a kid that you had those things. You remember the feeling that you had. And when you drink something that's better for you or functional or whatever that is, it still needs to hit on those notes that you remember. If not, you're like, this is okay, but like, I'm not going to sacrifice that nostalgic feeling that I had before.
Look, what you just said, hands down, is what I believe with full conviction sets us apart from anybody that's an insurgent brand in the iced tea space right now. We spent months on that process. I mean, months. I was churning cash with absolutely no line of sight to revenue for 7 months in a row, just trying to get to the end product. But at the end of the day, if your consumer experience is not the positive one, and it's not something that's going to make them come back, you're not even in the game in the first place, right? Like, I personally believe that everything after you have a good product is actually 20 times harder than getting to the good product, right? From a positioning standpoint. And for me, the transparency piece that you spoke about is so critical, right? Like the reason that this entire business came together is just like you, I grew up drinking every iced tea brand that's out there today. Every single one of the legacy iced tea brands, whether it's Snapple, Pure Leaf, Arizona, you name it, I drank it. I was obsessed with it, quite frankly. It was like my day-to-day go-to. But I also remember being the kid that was a war immigrant, refugee dude that didn't even speak English, and having two parents that, we didn't have access to quality healthcare yet, day one. And we relied on at-home tea, right? It was like medicine. It was like our form of medicine. And that's really the spark moment, right? Is how do I take everything I loved about the traditional conventional RTDT category that I grew up on, but I'm not consuming anymore because it just doesn't fit my product attribute need points, and combine it with everything that I almost had to rely on from a medicinal quality standpoint, being functional. And if you can put those two things together, which is extremely hard, right? Like you look at the soda category, how many brands tried to do what Poppy and Olipop did, right? Over and over and over again. I'd go to every BevNet and you'd see 16 different soda products that tasted like crap, quite frankly. But then Poppy and Olipop, they met the taste point, right? Like they do taste like soda at the end of the day, but they have that functional attribution point that sets them apart. And that's the key unlock for us. If you compare RYL, I challenge anybody, do a blind taste test. Take any of the emerging brands in the tea space, put RYL alongside any of them. And this is not a hit to anybody. It's just we had a disproportionate focus on the liquid. And consumers are telling us they love it. So we're going to stick to that equation.
So let's talk about kind of, you mentioned being a lover, I guess, of the first product, the vessel, the tea of the company, but you're sitting, at OWYN and obviously you guys were doing well. You were arguably enjoying, working there and getting a lot of experience and wherever, but something's in the back of your mind saying like, I want to create my own thing. I want to start like, what was that process like? Were you like ready from day one to like start something and you were like, hey, let me sit back and kind of get some experience and kind of do that? Or was it something that one day you just like, divine intervention and you were like, I got to do this?
I think that's a really funny question for me, because if you know me, like if you ask anybody that knows me super, super well from day one OWYN, day one buy, right? Like the young dude that was just crazy, right? He just wanted to go, 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 go. Like that's sort of my mentality. I work 18 hours a day, not because, yes, I have to right now, but I also just enjoy it. Like you call me on my birthday, my buddies will call and say, what are you doing today? I'm like, I'm at the office. And they're like, what are you doing at the office on your birthday, dude? I'm like, I want to be here. This is like my birthday. I'm choosing where I want to be, right? But look, if you ask anybody that knew me from day one, I've always wanted to do my own thing. And I would always come up with the most outlandish ideas that I thought were perfect. Felt like I've made up the new Uber, and walk into a room and tell them, I'm going to go do this thing. And they'd be like, dude, it's not that good. Like, it's not the good idea. And, it wasn't until I got to OWYN, right? Like when I was leaving by, I was very, very young. And I thought to myself, I could go do like my own thing, man. Like I could totally go do it. I got to OWYN and I was at a very elevated role for the first time in my career, right? And I started gaining exposure to all of the complexity of running a business. And I almost had to slow myself down and say, look, you're not ready yet. Like, candidly, I do think people will give you money. I think you'll come up with a great concept, but you will churn so much more cash than you have to trying to do it now. Whereas you can help run one of the best businesses in the game, right? We knew day one at OWYN that we had the equation. It was just a matter of let's build it, right? And I was very fortunate. I loved every single minute of that journey because every single day, everybody on the team, but more specifically myself, we learned something new about this business on a day in, day out basis. And really the point where I knew it was time for me is when I felt like the business was big enough where it didn't rely on 100% just obsessiveness anymore. It relied on process control, scale control, creating an infrastructure that really would lead the business to the point that it's gotten to now. But at the same point in time, there was a parallel, right? Of I finally felt convicted enough where I knew a large majority of loophole points that you can run into when you're running one of these beverage brands. And I knew what to avoid to a pretty large degree. You don't know everything, but you know enough to avoid the really bad stuff, the catastrophic stuff. And I always wanted to launch an iced tea company, like since day one. I mean, I have literal drawings from buy days when I was that young kid just audaciously thinking about stuff of teas, right? Didn't know what they would be, didn't know that they would end up looking like real tea and tasting like real tea, and the benefit claim would be real tea. But I always knew that the tea category was a $6 billion category with super high velocity opportunity, huge market share, one of the most widely known beverage categories on the globe, and thought it was the perfect time, candidly. So
it's interesting because I feel like in the United States, tea is one of those categories that, yes, large, yes, but a lot of times, maybe this is my bias, it definitely feels a lot of times like maybe like an afterthought comparable to some other kind of countries or cultures, like in terms of both the ready to drink, but also just the traditional kind of tea route. And there's a, I guess, a specialness to people naturally probably having a lot of bias like me that then creates this sleepiness of the category that then provides the opportunity for somebody like you that can kind of come in with some fresh ideas and go, I think I could do something different here. Like it's you look back at some of these categories over time of like entrepreneurs and I even not even at CPG, but you look at across some of the consumer goods categories and go, oh yeah, now it looks like those things they were stuck in time. Like nobody was really kind of focusing on bringing these things forward into a space that makes more sense to tomorrow's consumers. It always takes hindsight, and it's like when you looking into you, and I think these last couple of years, I've kind of called this T plus or functional T type thing. It's like it's a lot more exciting because of so many different underlying consumer trends and not even ones that are impressive enough to move needles, but also things that probably 5, 10, 15 years down the road that can also bring a lot of attention or value to like that category as a whole. It just seems like it's at such an important point right now. And it's like a lot of times timing is a big part of all this.
Timing's everything. Look, I think beverage as a whole is at a very interesting inflection point. I always like to talk about the life cycle of emerging beverage, right? And if you look at the life cycle of emerging beverage 10 years ago, talking like 2014, 2015, you saw disruption. We're going to go disrupt. And the reason that you had to disrupt is because the shopper that you were dealing with, right, the consumer, they were still the shopper that drank legacy beverage, right? Like they were still the shopper that grew up drinking it, still drank it, and you had to disrupt. You had to go in and almost steal share to introduce something new. You look at the category now 10 years later, there's a number of things that happen from a macro environmental standpoint that we can talk about, but more specifically, the shopper that was once disrupted, right, has really influenced the Gen Z millennial consumer who's now the shopper, right? Like that same shopper that we were focused on 10 years ago is now a new shopper that's grown up with the shopper that was once disruptive and doesn't even know legacy stuff as well as they did, right? So now, in my opinion, what you see is this huge opening because that next gen consumer, as we call it, right? The consumer that is truly the next generation of consumer behavior, they're brand new. It's like dealing with a fresh slate, right? They've drank water and sparkling water for the last 5 to 7 years predominantly. Enhanced water had its boom, right? Through Bai and vitamin water and things of that nature. And they're looking for new stuff to get into, but there is a huge disparity between what they can get into and what they're looking for. And in my opinion, the second radical shift that we saw take place, and one of the reasons that I thought the timing for RYL was so special and unique, COVID, right? I mean, no one wants to talk about COVID anymore because of all the negativity around COVID for years. However, to me, I almost look at, as a beverage operator, COVID as a positive. As crazy as that sounds, not for what it did from a health crisis standpoint, but more specifically what it did from a trend growth standpoint, because off of COVID, you saw insurgence in everything that was clean and functional, right? Because people suddenly, their consumer behavior attribute was, how do I add things that are beneficial to my body on a day-to-day basis that I also enjoy to consume? And there's no wonder in the world why you saw brands like Celsius start to kill it, right? Because Celsius was positioned in the HBC drug GM department for years, right? So if you're a consumer that's never drank energy and you're suddenly through the COVID mentality of I need benefits, you're exploring that health and wellness department more than you ever have, right? You're picking up protein cookies and immune support items and whatever it may be. And Celsius is sitting there for the taking, right? And they're like, there's an energy drink in health and wellness. Like, what is this thing? And you see just the pop happen. Poppy and Olipop, same idea, right? It's like water can only stay so flavorful for so long, right? So if you're that next gen consumer that's only drank still water, premium water, enhanced water, sparkling water for the last 5 to 10 years, you want to enter categories that you heard your parents talking about, but there's nothing that meets your needs. But then comes Olipop and Poppy, right? The functional revolution. It's adding those benefits that you're looking for. It's got the flavor that you can trust, yada, yada, yada. But to your point from earlier, tea is not seeing that, right? Tea is one of the largest categories, but it is boring. at the end of the day. And it's not boring in a negative way, but it is. It is still boring. The crazy thing about tea, though, is that consumer loyalty really is there. Once you find a tea that you love, you stay there. And there is nothing like a real tea in the tea market that can make mainstream noise. And that's why we're very unique from a positioning standpoint today.
Yeah, I like that point around just kind of the jumps in the consumers, if it's not even really generations, but just even like, I think we're sped those processes up, those life cycles up, that you have, 10 years, 7 to 10-year phases where people move from, that original, like you said, disruption of like, they were conventional, they were eating the Pringles and drinking the Coca-Cola. And then all of a sudden they moved over to this better for you version or some kind of variance. That was a huge disruption. But then to move them from that over to then what we're talking now, like better for you / functional, like that's not so much like a radical disruption. That's more of them moving a little bit further. And they're arguably probably in some categories that they're a lot more passionate in, already moved further than that. Maybe if it's like you said, clean energy, is it with OWYN, like a protein, like a clean, like they're already there in their mind. And then it's a matter of then choosing those same kind of benefits or value propositions or things that they're really kind of a purchase criterion standpoint looking at in other categories. So as they move across the board, it's like you're not necessarily trying to take people from Lipton and go, okay, you need to be drinking. It's like, hey, this is just your natural buying behavior, your purchasing behavior. This is like the persona we are looking for naturally are already buying these other things. So yes, we're offering you another category that has the same kind of propositions that make sense. It's not like you mentioned, it's not disruption. It's more from a standpoint of like, we know our customer, we know the persona, we know where they're going. And like, we're offering something that's within that realm in a category that didn't originally kind of offer a lot of that.
It's a focus on incrementality, right? Like, and I believe you've noted this to me when we've communicated in the past. Like, I believe in being additive, right? So like our term at RYL is, I always tell people, first day, don't say the word disruption to me, say additive. Like if we're not talking about being additive, I don't want to talk about it, because if you're a retailer, you don't want to hear disruption anymore, right? Like my goal at RYL Tea is not to go take down Pure Leaf. It's not to go take down Lipton. It's not to go take down Snapple. We don't want to do that. We want those guys to thrive. We want the category to continue to grow, right? From a baseline volume standpoint. We want to do exactly what you just said, which is bring new incremental growth to the category through a cultivated consumer that's very focused on function forward beverage occasions already, right? So they're adding to their shopping basket. It's helping everybody. That consumer is growing at a tremendous pace. Every statistic kind of indicates that. And we are that provider driving incremental value proposition, not just to a retailer, not just to a distributor, but also to a consumer that's looking for other categories to step into for the first time. And tea is that one now.
So let's talk a little bit, some of the strategic approach. And I think you made a mention of this. And I know when we were, before we hit record, kind of mentioning around a little bit of what I do is like, I think people that have a deep kind of strategic brain, they are focused on direction. They're like, they think through a lot of really kind of integrated pieces and they're saying, okay, I know directionally this is appropriate. This is going to be the right way. And, with a higher probability that it's going to produce the results you want. But then when it gets into market, based on a lot of different factors and things that are, you're playing the chessboard, you have to make, kind of moves and kind of adjustments. And you kind of have to go sometimes and go back to the drawing board in certain areas. Like I want to talk through both like some of those in a number of different areas where you were saying, okay, this is where before I launched this product, I thought was going to be where we were going to go. And then over time, I started to learn we actually had to kind of dial this a few degrees left or right because this is actually a better opportunity for us.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest challenge in the beverage space as an entrepreneur is leveling out expectation and leveling out excitement, right? Because excitement, in my opinion, is your biggest enemy. And I always tell people, not to put a pun on it, back to the beverage space, it's like, don't drink your Kool-Aid, right? Like, don't drink your own Kool-Aid. You really have to understand what other people think, not what you think.
Yeah.
And what we did very much so deliberately is we did not want to go from 0 to 100 million in sales in 1 to 2 years. That was not the goal, right? The goal for me, transparently, day one, was we're going to launch the business in the Northeast. we're going to pick very, very specific retail partners to partner with and almost treat those opportunities as incubation events, right? Like, let's learn as much as we can about this brand, about this product, about the tea environment within these retail landscapes as possible. Then let's come back, go to the drawing board and understand, okay, from what we've learned, what can we do next, right? Like, is this a conventional grocery brand? Is it a health and wellness brand? What's the pricing architecture need to look like? Is it achievable to do this type of business model in warehouse? Is it achievable to do this business model in DSD? What sort of supply chain do we have to look at? What's the vessel? Does an aluminum can work? We have a keen focus on sustainability, but if the consumer doesn't want sustainability in the iced tea category, you can't combat that, right? So we did all of that work for about 6 months, right? Just when we launched the business last year. And after that 6-month period, what we immediately found is you have a very high repeat rate, right? So your liquid's there, okay? The brand became cool overnight because of our partnership with Morgan Wallen to a huge subset of consumers across the country. And 3, velocity was there, right? So it's like, if you've got a high velocity item, not just in grocery, but in health and wellness, because we had a bifurcated strategy to enter both, it told us that we have a very well-rounded business, right? And then the question really became, everybody out there is very focused on growing as quickly as they can. My focus is definitely growth. We want to grow at a tremendous pace, and we've done that to date. But we also want to grow sustainably, meaning I don't want to run a company that someone has to invest $200 million into over the course of the next 5 years. I want to run a company that every investment we put into the business is truly growth equity focused, and it has an outcome that we believe we can get to, right? So we're not the type of business that's funding product margin through capital investors. We're not the type of business that's funding large scale event saturation because we think we need to be in as many people's hands as possible through events. We're the company that's saying, how do we deliver the most value to our partners in the retail landscape, ensure that they succeed with the brand from a marketing awareness lens standpoint, and do it at the most profitable rate possible for us so that we're never behind the 8 ball and always ahead of it, right? As we're scaling the business. So strategy has been a key piece of our business, but I believe that one of the things that we've done better than almost any beverage company in years 1 and 2 is really lay out the foundation for arguably of an extremely promising future, right? It's like, you've got the brand, you've got the velocity, you've set up the business foundation in a format that's sustainable long-term from an economic footprint standpoint. Now you can truly look at the lens and say, what's our growth play, right? Where do we want to invest? How much, when, et cetera.
And you maybe kind of answered this already, but kind of curious because I think this is a learning or a lesson I think that you could probably kind of take is that you mentioned Morgan Wallen, and I think that anytime you inject a business with a celebrity of that kind of stature that can instantly provide a ton of opportunities. There's I'm sure right after that, and when that started to get activated and started to get moving, you had every retailer, every alt channel, everything calling you up saying, "Hey, let's get you going. Let's do this as quickly as possible." And if you don't know what you just kind of mentioned around, the foundation, the parameters, like what is a win, what's not a win, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, it's very hard to answer yes and no to those opportunities because as an entrepreneur that's maybe just flying around and seeing things, opportunities everywhere, they grab everything. They just think, oh, well, all of them are equal. Let's just grab them all. And I have this, catalyst like, Morgan Wallen that's giving me all these opportunities. And how do I say no? How do I do this? Because I turn this on. So then I have to try to, leverage as much as I can out of this instead of kind of what I think you were mentioning is like, you have to stay within the bounds. You have to stay within the, the model a little bit and kind of say, okay, we'll take on risk and exposure in certain places that we think we're going to be okay with, but yet we also need to stay within our plan because it's going to get us in trouble if we get a little bit too ahead of this.
Look, I think several things I would say back to that, right? And a lot of what you said is so spot on. It's not even funny, right? Because I've just went through this over the last year and a half. But first and foremost, for me, I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by incredible people, right? Whether it's at an investment level, operating team level, right? The team around me at RYL is best in class. We've got Ken Kurtz, who's built 2 legacy brands through Buy and Fiji, and you've got Ruben Raffaelli, who's ran operations for some of the best businesses in the CPG space. So what I always try to do is don't think about your brand first, think about the playbook, right? And we're fortunate because we have visibility through personal experience of what a very good playbook looks like, right? Because if you really look at any beverage brand that's got to an astronomical impact event basis of sale or whatever it may be, IPO, et cetera, they all kind of do it in a pretty similar way, right? Like it's not overtly rocket science. You don't have to recreate the wheel. And what I'm a big believer in, first and foremost, is if you can stick to a plan, right, to some degree, as best as you can, you're controlling the destiny of the future, right? You're not putting it up for grabs. You're not sending out a flyer, right? Like you are genuinely, to the best possible degree, controlling the destiny of the business. And that was first and foremost our number one most important focus point. Secondly, we're fortunate because this is not a general endorsement arrangement, right? Like we didn't go out and meet with 30 celebrities to see who had the best deal terms and who had the best audiences and who could create the most buzz day one. We didn't even have an intention of bringing a celebrity into the business, right? We knew that what we had from a liquid standpoint and just pure proposition standpoint could stand on its own. And when we met Morgan, it was an organic fit, meaning we knew the space. We were passionate about tea, specifically me, because of my personal journey in life, right? Being that refugee kid that had a passion for tea that was unique to everybody else in the space. And Morgan had a passion for tea because he grew up in Eastern Tennessee drinking Southern sweet tea every single Sunday. Like that was the first story that we told about each other's lives to one another, right? My story of being the kid that had to drink it because it was like my version of Advil, and him being the kid that had to drink it because his mama poured 50 grams of sugar in it every Sunday. And, you know, when we came together, it was never with the focus of how do we go out and build Morgan Wallen's tea brand, right? Like I think when you look at celebrity deals, everybody's like, we're going to go build X, Y, and Z's whatever company, right? Like it's all about them. Morgan is a partner, right? He invested in the business. He put his own dollars into the company because he believed in what it stood for, right? From a product standpoint. And he believed in where the trends were headed. And he believed in what that Gen Z millennial consumer wanted. And it was never about how do we put the fire on and build up a celebrity endorsed brand and take all the volume that we can and capitalize on all the opportunities we can. Because at the end of the day, it's like, well, if it goes really good, everybody's going to say you're a genius. If it goes really bad, everybody's going to say you were a dummy, right? Like that's truly the truth. So for us, it was, look, we're very fortunate. We feel super lucky that we have the backbone marketing machine that a guy like Morgan Wallen provides as a partner to our business. But we're very conscientious of the fact that, look, we're not here to just roll the dice. We're going to build this thing. Like there's no doubt that we will be the brand that gets acquired or goes public or doesn't do either and just runs a profitable business in a couple of years. We know that, right? But the only reason we know that is because it's built off of a strategic playbook that works in this category and not because we're rolling the dice and taking large scale risk.
Hearing both sides of the, you and Morgan's kind of stories and like, I'm thinking about visualization of like this Venn diagram and kind of how it mashes together. And I think about, when you're thinking about these celebrity packaged goods brands or whatever that is, and where things seem to, at least in my mind, play out like in the bad way is that a lot of these brands are built off the individual person. They're built off of this person. And I think that the difference between what you just mentioned and that is that you're building off the essence or the feeling in which somebody had and what you had and how those things match up together over a person, and that key man risk and that thing that has, ultimately going to be the issue why maybe a lot of these celebrity packaged goods brands don't have liquidity events, because do these different founders that are celebrities, do they want to sell that good, hawk that good for the next 20 years? Probably not. Like, they don't want to. So then when you are these major strategics or whatever, why do you buy that brand? Because you want that special sauce, you want that person, but yet that person's not going to be attached to it for the long haul. So then there's a transitionary phase that few have really kind of figured out. And I think what you mentioned, at least my feeling is that around that, like, you understand that it's the essence of it that is baked into the brand. And it's not even that, and maybe this is a discussion we'll have in a few minutes, but like, as you move into categories, like it's kind of taking the essences and kind of making them all make sense in a mixture that kind of goes there. Not that it's this outstanding person. I think right now, most people would look at your brand, and this is just kind of, don't take disrespect, they would look at it as maybe a little bit of that, this is Morgan Wallen's brand or something like that. But your job over time. And it takes a while, because I think that's, again, it goes back to the initial thing that people will see is that. And then it takes them time, building a brand. I always tell people, like, they use that word a lot of times, and it's arguably the wrong word. Most people are selling products, and building a brand is chapters of stories built long time with the market telling you what your brand is. You don't own the brand, you own the company. And a lot of times it takes time for those stories to unfold and the chapters to be put together in the book that makes sense. So it's not that you could even do that right off the bat. It sometimes when you have such a star-studded, again, catalyst or something like that, that does initially push forward a little bit on some of this other stuff. And then it's your job to fill in the gaps in the foundation over time that eventually it just makes sense to people. But right now, that's the case, because that's just how most people in a 6-second headline world are.
Look, at the end of the day, if that's the impression today, we did our job right. Meaning that means that Morgan partnering in with RYL worked, right? It means that someone said, I saw it, he was the right guy, the story made sense. But the story doesn't make sense because we designed it. The story makes sense because it's the story, right? And that's what's going to carry. And 2 years from today, if you and I are talking and you're going, hey, I think people are still saying it's the Morgan Wallen brand, I'll be like, shit, we may have went wrong somewhere in the last year. But, transparently, I think you're already starting to see the evolution. Look, it's the difference between a partner and a marketer, right? In my opinion, a partner gives you the tools from their toolkit, and I give the tools from my toolkit, and we put them in one box, right? And we mix them up, and the operating intelligence and expertise from my side matches with the marketing juice from Morgan's side and the authenticity of his cult audience on his side. And they come together and they create that initial spark. But then it's all about what is the brand doing for the customer and the category that's going to allow it to stick, right? So that's why our keen focus is not get to $100 million immediately. Look, Josh, I'll be honest. I could have easily done that. I'll just be straight up. Like, that would have been a 2-step process last year. I could have just waited a little bit and said, hey, I'm going to start allocating this product out, and we're going to get it freaking everywhere next year, and it'll do $100 million in this first year, and then I'm going to try to hold on to that as quickly as I can and keep scaling it. But that's not sustainable. Like, you can't then give that to somebody and expect them to be able to build off of it. You're going to give it to them and it's going to fall down, right? Is what ultimately is going to happen. We want to be very prescriptive. We want people to know about RYL, and that's what Morgan's helping us do across the rest of our marketing outside of Morgan as well. But long term, we want the category that we're creating, being the functional tea category right now, to be what gets people to stick, right? Because those consumers, just like you mentioned a minute ago, they're there. Like, that large scale cultivated wellness focused customer, they exist now. It's not like it was years ago. They're here, they're staying, they're growing. It's getting bigger. We want to be the option that they know and trust. That's it.
I want to kind of take a slight detour for the last second. And this is kind of going into the future and the vision and kind of wherever, because I think I liked hearing about that when you guys first launched. Like, you were already talking about what the RYL Company was going to be. One, I don't, there's a play on words, which is great, but I like that it's an acronym too. like that it's, rethink your liquids, which then builds into this idea of, okay, it's a beverage platform. It's a, what can this be in the future? What is the next category that we disrupt? What's the next thing? And again, right now, you probably have more than enough of things on your plate that you're not really worried about it. You do, at least that you sent me, that you're playing around with some, half and half lemonades and things like that. And maybe that's an opportunity. I'm curious to see like what or how your mind's thinking about that, because maybe it was early on PR, like some of the things you said, like you're like, I'm going to tell everybody about the next, 10 years of my business. And then you got into operating and you're like, okay, I should probably chill out because I got a long path of this tea go out first.
I wish I was brilliant enough to think about that from a PR standpoint back then. The truth of it is, and I always tell people this, it's not just real tea, it's the real company, right? And the reason it's the real company is because we are very passionate about our acronym, right? Rethink your liquids. That is what drives me on a day-to-day basis. We're building a legacy tea brand through that platform, but we're ultimately focused on redefining the beverage landscape for the next gen consumer, right? And offering products that they know they love from a brand that they know they trust, that's delivered in one of the largest legacy categories that they love, right? Being iced tea. And our goal is never going to be off the eyeball of building a large scale market share captain tea brand, but it's very much so always going to be focused on, why are you building that customer if you're not going to give them other things that they'll love, right? So for us, beverage is such a diversified category wide occasion. You could be a million things as a beverage company, but we want to help rethink legacy liquid occasions, whether it be any occasion within the RTD space. You'll see RYL Tea start to explore a lot of stuff. I can't full blown tell you what those are yet, just because I would blow the whole marketing campaign. I think my marketing team would kill me. But what I'll tell you is our central focus is be that next gen consumer focused iced tea brand. Bring the incremental share growth to the iced tea category that can stick and stay. And as we do that, offer new alternatives in other legacy categories that all stay true to what we stand for, which is clean, functional, refreshment. That's it. We want to be clean, we want to be functional, and we want to be refreshing. When you think about those things, clean has a bunch of things that fall within it. We want to be low calorie, we want to be zero sugar, right? We don't want to have anything artificial in our products. Functional is of the utmost importance to me. What benefit is the product delivering? And then refreshing to me means so much more than just being refreshing as a occasion. It means being tasteful, being flavor forward, being what you said earlier, what you expect from a nostalgic occasion. And if we can do all three of those things, RYL can be so much more than just a tea brand 5 years from today.
I'm going to leave with a random comment here. throw a curveball at the end. Has anybody given you a honorary degree in Southern culture yet? I feel as so I live in Texas now, but I grew up in Ohio, and I a lot of times will face situations that I'm just out of my bounds because I'm like, I don't know, but you have a much different story. So I assume that there's times when you're in the room with, if it's Morgan or even some of the other guys that you have, Jameis Winston, like they say things and you're like, I don't know if I know what they're talking about.
Look, I think that's so funny. I was not the Southern guy, right? Like I'm very much so the guy that you would imagine works in a building in New York City, right? Like if you meet me, I'm like that dude. But it's funny because the team will laugh at me. I will randomly drop like Southern slang terms around the office. I'll be like, "What's up, y'all?" And I'm like, "Dude, I didn't even say y'all. Like I didn't even know. I never said that term 2 years ago." So it's funny. But no, I've never gotten the honorary button yet. But hopefully one day soon. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, want to be cognizant of the time and be respectful of that. I appreciate everything. I think the conversation was great. I think a ton of insights. I think people will definitely enjoy it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate the opportunity. And if you haven't tried RYL Tea, give it a try today. You can find it at Walmart, Kroger, you name it. We got it. Let's get after it.
Always be closing.
Always be closing. Yeah. That's it.
I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. If you did, consider hitting that like button to support me. Also help me get to my new short-term goal of 4,000 subscribers by hitting that subscribe button. I'd love to see you join me on this journey, but we need to fix the fact that slightly more than 90% of you that are watching this YouTube video right now are not subscribed to my channel, and that makes me extremely sad. But I do want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one.